Hi, Father Ian Van Heusen here. I'm here with Rob Agnelli. We're talking about the theological virtues you can look back over. This is the last in the series. We talked about the cardinal virtues. We talked about faith, hope, and now we're going to be getting into love, right? So it's like John Lennon said, all you need is love.
Sure.
All you need is love. So people say that, right? All you need is love. First of all, what do they mean by that? And I mean, do we really believe that? I mean, we talk about God as love. We talk about the importance of love one another. But I don't think Jesus means that we all need to smoke weed with the Beatles
or just be nice, right? That's really what most people mean. Be nice, let everyone have their own definition of love. And some of this is, again, the trapping of English, right? Of not having different words for love, right? Like when we talk about the theological virtue of love, we really mean charity, the love of God, right? And that God pours that into us, and then we're supposed to pour it into other people, right? Which is a way different, we got to love like God loves. And that is impossible on a human level, but he makes it possible and gives us a gift to do it, right? And so when we talk about Christian love is way different from John Lennon, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so get into, you alluded to this, in other languages, there's different names for love, right? So C.S. Lewis talks about the four loves. There's the Greek words for love. And then I'll tell you my own little thoughts and how we can understand this, because I do a little exercise with weddings. But I'd be curious, why don't you flesh out because I feel like you might be able to define it a little bit better. You're a little bit good more with the details than I am on some of this. What are the different kinds of loves that were recognized in the ancient world? Right?
Yeah, so there's four of them. There's storge, which is kind of just like, I like that person, right? And then there's philia, which is brotherly love. And then there's eros, which is sexual love, right? Yeah. And then Christianity comes along and adds a fourth one, which is agape or agape, right? And what that really is the self-giving love, right? That only God can give, and only you can, when you're in a state of grace, connected to God, only you can love that way, and only Christians can love that way. Yeah. But it's the love we're all longing for, right?
Absolutely. And I kind of tie this in a little bit. I'll flesh out a little bit. I give definitions of love. What I do this exercise. It's really fun. I walk them through definitions of love. And of course, it's a marriage prep, so they're gushing the first part. So I say, love is a good feeling. They're like, oh yeah, it's a good feeling. Love is intimacy and friendship. Love is harmony. Actually, I do harmony, then intimacy and friendship, but I'm kind of building a hierarchy here. Then love is the gift of self, and then love is willing the good of the other. So you can kind of see a hierarchy there, right? Well, the funny thing, what I then do, so they go through that and they're kind of gushing. Then I show them this couple where the wife, a month before the wedding, is horribly disfigured, and they were models. I walk them back through. Love is a good feeling, and we imagine it again. It's really interesting. They get serious, but the interesting thing they say is that the love is deeper and the feeling is better when it's kind of the result of trial. And then I show them Jesus Christ on the cross, and they always say that love is a good feeling for Jesus Christ because he knows what he's giving himself for. I learned that insight from wedding couples, because I wouldn't, before that, when I was first imagining the exercise like 5-6 years ago before I was a priest, I didn't think of Jesus on the cross, love is a good feeling, being true. But there is a sense that incredible pain, incredible suffering can feel good interiorly when we know we're laying down our life for something or for someone, right?
Yeah, so that's the truth hidden in the lie about love being a feeling, right? That love isn't just a feeling, but it should. A complete love would include our emotions and our feelings, right? And in fact, like a total love, like love of Christ on the cross, isn't cold, right? Like just to say love is willing the good of another, true, but it's not enough, right? Because that's cold. That's not, love is supposed to be warm, right? And that it's at the heart of, that's why God takes on flesh, right? So that he can love with a human heart and really love with feeling, and we can somehow share, and not just the love of God, willing the good of the other, but that full love that includes feeling love, right?
I would be curious. So sometimes people have a hard time understanding what it means to will the good of another. I'm gonna flesh it out a little bit, and then you can kind of help me out with this. So when we say love is willing the good of the other, which is the highest, is in Thomistic thought, there's the intellect and the will. And really, I hate that when people say Thomistic thought. I think it's biblical thought.
That's just anthropology.
It's just anthropology.
It just is the way it is.
It just is, and then some people are rolling their eyes when I'm saying this, but that's where I'm coming from. But in the classical mind, in the traditional Catholic Christian thought, there's the intellect and the will. So the intellect sees what is true, and the intellect, the will is moved by what is good. And so when you will the good of another, you choose what is good for somebody else. Now you can kind of see that, and I think what you're alluding to is that doesn't imply an emotion, but it does in a certain sense, because the passions move the will. So when we love something, we're moved towards, this is the emotion of love, not the theological virtue. When we love something on a human level, on an animal level, like when I love pizza, my will is moved towards it because I perceive it as good. But that's the raw emotions. With the theological virtue, I'm moved towards God because I perceive God as good, but that's beyond what I'm capable of on myself. Maybe you could flesh it out a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's why it's a supernatural gift, right? And we have a little bit of trouble now, even just in the church, talking about, we muddle the idea of supernatural versus natural, right? Like there's certain things that we can't do on our own, but God in his goodness elevates us to do, right? Like we can't love God like that, like Christ loves the Father, except by a supernatural gift. Yeah. All right. And that love, that willing the good of the other person, is not just in a certain time, like the sort of wordplay of affective and effective, right? Like complete love is affective, it's emotional, but it's also effective. I do something for that is completely for the good of the other person, right?
And our bishop draws this out. He talks a lot about, I don't know if you've heard him preach on this, he talks a lot about saying that we love pizza and loving God. And he uses slightly different language, but he gets at this idea is that the way we love things is not the same way we love people, and is not the same way we love God. So some people will say, well, your animal doesn't love you or whatever. I got in this debate with somebody on Twitter, a Franciscan. I was like, no, your dog does love you, but that's an animal love. Yeah. And actually, according to Aquinas, according to the classical thought and the scriptures, love animates all things. It's a kind of gravity. Love is the foundation of all things.
Love really does make the world go round.
Exactly. Love really does make the world go round. But that's not the same thing as when we love God as a human, a rational being. We're drawn to something higher than ourselves, and we're moved by something higher than ourselves, right?
Yeah, and that idea of us being able to love God, right? Like, because love, it requires equality. Yeah, right? Like we're not equal at all, right? And so there's this elevation, and now there's like, and it kind of fulfills the other three loves that I was talking about, right? Yeah. Like in a certain sense, like I can, I love is it Bernini that has the statue of Saint Teresa of Avila in
actually,
ecstasy.
I got a great story about that. Finish your thought.
Yeah, so like that looks like erotic love, right? Because it's the complete love, and she's lost in prayer, in ecstasy to God, right?
This is going to blow your mind. So you know where that's at, and this is one of my life goals now. I was there in Rome. It's a side altar. So back in the day, you celebrated Mass ad orientem. So imagine this. That's what you see. I tested this out when I was there. When a priest would have done the elevation, celebrating Mass ad orientem, they would have been looking at her face.
Oh, that's incredible.
In ecstasy. And so now one of my life goals is to go back and celebrate Mass on that side altar. But so tying in love with the Eucharist, right? I mean, they talk about the Mass agape meal is, we can only love God the way we ought to. We can only be brought to that equality by means of his grace giving to us in the Mass. We cannot do it on our own. We will always fall short of loving God as we ought to without his grace, right?
Yeah, and that's the beauty of, like, that's Pope Benedict, one of his apostolic exhortations, I think, was the sacrament of charity, right? Where it was on the Eucharist. So he does have Deus Caritas S too, but so he talks about the Eucharist being the sacrament of charity, right? Because of who it is.
And when you say charity, you mean divine love.
Yeah, divine love, right?
We sometimes call it charity. Yeah.
Yeah, that beautiful, like, invitation in the Eucharist to love, like, share in Christ's love for the Father, right? Yeah. And like it comes right out of the Sacred Heart. And that's the Sacred Heart devotion is such a beautiful, that's why it's such a beautiful devotion, right? Is because no matter what, like my love will be imperfect for God, but what I'm offering to him is going to be perfect because it's loved with a human heart, and that heart is Christ, right?
Yeah. And I want to tie this in. You mentioned something about the equality with love. So one of the cool teachings of Aquinas, which again is just classical Catholic thought, he talks about love with a mutual indwelling. And the way I would explain it is, in your relationship with your spouse, when you experience the person, you love the person, you have an internal sense of who they are, that you can actually predict things about them that you may not have a hard, fast answer for, right? So like if right now I said, it's your anniversary, or maybe anniversary might be a bad example, but like, hey, you need to pick up food for your wife for dinner. You might have a good guess of what she might like. You might have a good intuition. You might be able to predict how she'll respond if you're going to tell her something, right? And so this is, when we love something, there's a kind of mutual indwelling. Same thing can happen when we love pleasure, we love comfort. But when we love God, that's the fruit of that is the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. God comes to dwell within us, right? That's one of the powerful, radical claims of Christianity. We are by grace made equal, and God comes to dwell in us mystically, right?
Yeah, and really, what is holiness other than, like, how do you grow in holiness? Well, you grow in love for God, right?
Exactly.
Like, and as that love grows, he dwells more fully, like until it's fully dwelling in you in a certain sense, right? And that idea of that mutual giving, right? That's ultimately what it is. It's a mutual gift, right? So it's not just God has set it up so that he just gives to us. Like, in a certain sense, we have something that he wants, and we can give back to him, right? So he's also, there's the giving and the receiving of the gift, right?
Exactly. So much deeper than all we need is love.
Yes, definitely.
Well, I want to switch back to the society about this. I'm trying to think how we could draw this back in. So this whole idea that love is just being nice, obviously I think people at this point, they're starting to realize it's a little bit deeper than that. But also sometimes loving people is doing what makes them uncomfortable or something that they don't want. So when it comes to pointing out other people's sins or calling people to conversion, when the church calls certain people to conversion by pointing out their sins, this is an act of love, right?
Yeah, and this is like, again, controversial in the sense of, we hear so much about like not giving the Eucharist to certain politicians, but if we lose the sight of the fact that they're actually trying, it's an act of love to do that, right?
To save their soul.
Yeah, to save their soul, right? And it's not punitive. The church doesn't act punitively. The church always calls to conversion, and sometimes the call to conversion is really harsh because the person is really pointed in the wrong direction, right? And so divorced from the fact that it's moved in that direction, it seems cold and callous. But I think some of that is our inability to understand that jealous love is a good thing sometimes, right? Like, God is a jealous lover, right? Because he doesn't want us to give ourselves to something less than him, right? And so we can jealously love another person in the sense of, like, I don't want you to give yourself to this vice. Like, I want you to wed yourself to the good so that we can be in the communion of saints.
And that's what part of willing the good of the other is.
That's exactly what it is.
I mean, because sometimes that feels good, sometimes it doesn't feel good.
Yeah, and very often it doesn't, right? Because their own conscience is already telling, and then now you put a voice to it, an exterior voice, and it seems like they don't really like that, and that makes it really harsh. But if you really love the other person, you're going to tell them, and using worldly examples, right? If somebody's about to walk in front of a bus, like, the loving thing to do is grab them and say, hey, you're about to walk in front of a bus.
Yeah, and sometimes it's grab them and pull them out of the way.
Yeah,
and then they're upset at you.
Yeah, and maybe even skin their knees, throw them down on the ground. I mean, sometimes that has to happen, right? But to not just to stand by, and this is kind of rampant in our culture, just to stand by and go,
accept whatever.
Yeah, that they're just messed up or whatever. Like, just to give up on someone, right? Like, God never gives up on anyone, and if we're gonna really tell someone the good news that God's never giving up on them, we can't either.
Heck yeah. I think that's a good place to conclude. Yeah. So this has been a fun series.
Yeah, I enjoyed it totally.
We'll definitely have to do this again, but thanks, Rob, so much for your time.
You're welcome.
So thanks, everybody, for following along. Thanks, man. Good job, man.
It was great.